Hi and welcome to the Malat cookery channel. So today's recipe is absolutely gorgeous, super easy to make and relatively inexpensive, so what more could you want? I'm going to be making a braised steak with a caramelised onion and mushroom gravy served on a grilled baguette. Now the spice blend from the Malat range I'm going to be using today is their Montreal steakhouse seasoning. And as usual, a full list of ingredients will be given at the end of the video. So let's have a look at those ingredients now and anything else we're going to need for today's recipe. So for this recipe today, I've got 400 grams of braising steak, 20 grams of butter, 20 grams of Malat Montreal steakhouse seasoning, which we're going to split into two. So 10 grams is going to be used to season the steak and 10 grams is going to be used to season the gravy. 20 grams of plain flour or all-purpose flour, about 200 grams of closed cut mushrooms, 1 medium white onion which has been sliced, half a litre or about a pint of beef stock, some olive oil, some Lea & Perrins Worcester sauce or Worcestershire sauce if you're in America. I'm also going to be using a little bit of gravy browning as well, just to darken the gravy slightly. And then at the back we have a white baguette. So the first thing we need to do is just to season the steak on both sides with the Montreal steakhouse seasoning. So I'm just going to cover the steak now with cling film or food wrap. Just leave it to rest for about 15 minutes. It's only just come out of the fridge, so we want the steak to get up to room temperature before we start cooking with it. So once the steak has rested, the next thing we need to do is we're going to be searing the steak in a pan. So you need a frying pan, or in this case a griddle pan, with sides deep enough that will hold the half a litre of beef stock in, because we're going to be doing everything in the pan. The reason that we're going to be searing the steak in the frying pan is not to cook the steak, but we want to sear the outside, get this Maillard reaction going that I keep going on about in some of the videos. We get that searing effect, lots of flavour on the outside of the steak, but more importantly than that for this particular recipe is we get all of the flavour in the pan itself, and that's where all of the flavour is going to come from for the gravy that we're going to be using in this recipe. So we get the pan up to a fairly high heat. We're going to be cooking the steak on either side for about 1.5 to 2 minutes, no more than that. So the pan should be up to temperature now. And again, you have to hear that sizzle straight away. So that's 1.5 minutes now on that side. Turn the steak over. Again, 1.5 minutes on that side, then it should be done. Okay, so the steak's now done its job. We've got some fantastic flavours on the outside of the steak, but as I said, more importantly, we've got all this really nice flavour now in the pan, in which we can make a really decent gravy. So the steak is going to be left for 10 minutes to cool down before we slice it. If we slice the steak while it's very hot, it will just release too much of the juices within it, and it'll become quite dry. So while that's resting, it gives us a good opportunity obviously to do the gravy. So the first thing that goes into the pan is the onions. I'm going to turn the heat down slightly, we don't want to burn the onions. So what we're looking to do with the onions now is them to soften and just go translucent. It'll take about 3 or 4 minutes. So the onions are now cooked through. They've got a really nice colour to them, and the smells from this pan are just incredible. So the next thing I want to do is to add the butter. And we're just going to melt the butter and then add the mushrooms to the pan and just cook those through for another couple of minutes. Okay, so in go the mushrooms. So after the mushrooms have been cooking for another couple of minutes, I just want to add a little bit more olive oil. So maybe about 3 tablespoons. And that's before we add in the flour. The mushrooms will tend to soak up most of the olive oil and butter that was in there before. We just need a little bit of extra fat in order to allow the plain flour to bind to it. Next thing I want to do is to add the remainder of the Malat Montreal steak seasoning. Just mix that through. Oh, that smells unbelievable. We now want to add in the flour. And we just cook this through for about a minute. And the flour is going to be obviously our thickening agent for the gravy. So the reason that I do it this way and not add corn flour into it is because corn flour tends to dilute the flavours. Doing it this way, the flour cooks through and it picks up any last remaining flavour that's in the pan. And now we can add in our beef stock, just a little bit at a time, just so we reduce the likelihood of getting lumps. So all of that's now mixed in. Next thing I'm going to do is just a splash of butter sauce. And mix that in. And then this bit is optional, but I am going to make this gravy just that little bit darker. Just a tiny bit at a time. It is quite powerful, this gravy browning. That's why I pour it into the lid first rather than go straight from the bottle. The last thing you want is to have a lot of gravy browning in here and turn the gravy a jet black. I'm just going to go just slightly darker than that. Okay, that should be enough. So all I'm going to do with this now is keep it over a medium heat, let it reduce slightly. That will also increase the flavour. Take about 15 minutes on this medium heat just to do that. And then once that's done, I'll show you the next step. So the gravy is all done. I've sliced the braising steak into 2 or 3 millimeter strips. I'm going to place the gravy on top of the braising steak, cover with the lid and place into a preheated oven, 180 degrees centigrade. I would love to tell you for how long, but it all depends on the quality of the braising steak that you guys are going to be using. I've had braising steak from a supermarket that took 1 hour and 10 minutes to go to what I class as being fork tender, which is where you place 2 forks into the braising steak and then start to pull them apart, and if it tears apart easy, that's perfect. I've also had braising steak from another supermarket that took 2 hours to actually get to fork tender. So I can't tell you. What I would suggest is after about 1 hour and 10 minutes, 1 hour and 15 minutes, take the Pirates dish from the oven or the oven proof dish from the oven and just test the braising steak to see whether it is tender or not. If it's really tough, then clearly you're going to need at least another half an hour on top. So as I said, gravy on top, lid on, into a preheated oven, 180 degrees centigrade, and we'll come back when it's done. So just before we take the steak from the oven, I'm just going to prepare the baguette. So we've cut a piece of baguette and I have placed some olive oil onto the surface we're going to be frying. So place it into the griddle pan. I'm just going to fry this off now for about 3 or 4 minutes. Not only does this add to the flavour, but it also stops the bread from becoming soggy when we place the steak with a little bit of gravy on the top. Okay, so that's everything done. Let's plate up. So we just want to put just a few strips of the steak on our baguette. Just one more. Some mushroom and onion on the top. Wow, the smell is just absolutely incredible. Okay, so we don't want to put too much gravy actually on the baguette itself. Have some fries, or I say in the UK, chips. I'm certainly not going to let this incredible gravy go to waste. So we can even have it as a dipping sauce for the chips. Either that, or you can just pour the gravy straight on top of the chips. But I think this is just a nicer way. It gives people the option to either eat the chips on their own or fries on their own, or have them with the gravy. It also presents better as well like this, I think. So that's it, braised steak with a caramelised onion and mushroom gravy, fries or chips, and some delicious gravy dipping sauce. So that's it, absolutely delicious. Braised steak in a caramelised onion and mushroom gravy, served on a baguette. Side dish of French fries or chips if you're in the UK. Absolutely superb, and it is relatively inexpensive. So So please subscribe to the channel, and as usual, if you've enjoyed this particular video, hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching.